The divorce papers smelled like fresh ink and finality. I know that sounds like a strange thing to notice, the smell of paper on the morning your marriage ends, but I've always processed the world through small sensory details, the ones that lodge themselves in memory like splinters. The papers were sitting on the kitchen island when I came downstairs at 6:15 in the morning, already signed by Marcus, already notarized, already done. He hadn't even waited to hand them to me in person. He'd left them like a bill, like something administrative. I stood in the kitchen of the house I had designed myself. Every cabinet placement, every tile choice, every window angle calculated for the way morning light moved through a room, and I read my name at the top of the document. Serena Calloway Voss. Soon to be just Serena Calloway again. The house was quiet in the way that houses go quiet when something has been decided inside them. Our dog, a golden retriever named Bo, was watching me from his bed near the back door, with the particular expression animals get when they understand the emotional weather of a room without understanding the cause. I sat down on the cold kitchen floor beside him and put my hand in his fur and didn't cry. I'd done my crying 3 months ago when I'd first understood what Marcus was. I'd used up what I had. What was left was something quieter and more dangerous. Clarity. Let me tell you about Marcus Voss. He was handsome in a way that had once felt like sunshine and later felt like a performance. Tall, broad-shouldered. The kind of man who walked into rooms and got them. He came from old Philadelphia money. The Voss family had been in commercial banking for 4 generations. And he wore that history the way some people wear cologne, invisibly present, slightly suffocating, impossible to ignore once you'd noticed it. We'd met when I was 26 and working as a junior architect at a firm downtown. He'd come in for a commercial project consultation and stayed to ask me to dinner. And I'd said yes because he was charming and I was young, and I hadn't yet learned to read the difference between a man who admired you and a man who wanted to acquire you. We married when I was 28. I was 34 now. 6 years. In 6 years, I had built his family's commercial portfolio from a respectable regional operation into something that was being profiled in architecture and design publications. I had won 2 industry awards under the Voss family business umbrella. I had grown Voss Development's brand recognition by a factor I could measure precisely because I had been the one measuring it. I had done all of this while being introduced at parties as Marcus's wife, while watching my own name disappear from conversations it should have been central to, while accepting the quiet, consistent message of a family and a husband who saw my talent as a resource and my personhood as a footnote. And then Marcus had found someone else. Her name was Priya. She was 24. She worked in his father's bank. I say this without venom. I'd process the venom, but it's important context because it told me everything about what Marcus had always wanted. Someone newer, someone unformed, someone who hadn't yet developed the inconvenient complexity of knowing her own worth. The divorce settlement he proposed was what his attorney called straightforward. He got the house, he got the investment portfolio we built jointly, he got the intellectual property rights to the architectural designs created under the Voss development contract, a clause buried in a contract amendment I'd signed 3 years ago during a week when I was managing 2 major project deadlines and had trusted him, catastrophically, to have our shared interests at heart. He got everything, his attorney said, that was contractually entitled to him. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was what everything actually was. I met Jonah at a hardware store. I know how that sounds. But I have a theory that hardware stores are where real people go, as opposed to the curated social performances of the spaces Marcus had always preferred. And real people are where real things begin. He was looking at finished samples for a renovation project, holding 2 pieces of reclaimed oak up to the light with the focused expression of someone who cared about getting it right. He was wearing worn work clothes and had sawdust in his hair, which is not typically the opening image of a love story, but felt to me like the most honest thing I'd seen in years. We talked about wood grain for 20 minutes, then coffee for 2 hours. His name was Jonah Reeves. He ran a small construction and renovation company. He drove a truck. He cooked his own meals and read actual books, and had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who've learned to be comfortable in their own company. He asked questions and waited for the answers. He didn't perform. We'd been seeing each other for 4 months by the time Marcus served the papers, carefully and quietly, because I wasn't ready to explain him to the wreckage of my marriage, and because Jonah, to his credit, never pushed. He waited. He let me move at my own pace through the debris field. There was something else about Jonah that I was still assembling, small things that didn't quite add up. The quality of his watch, the way he spoke about construction not as a job but as a philosophy, the phone calls he took in another room that lasted longer than crew scheduling required. The careful neutrality of his expression whenever money came up in conversation. I'd filed it away. I was still filing. The afternoon I signed the divorce papers, I called my attorney. Her name was Vivian Park, and she had the energy of someone who had been underestimated her entire career and had decided to make that other people's problem. I'd found her through a referral from a colleague, and in our first meeting, she'd looked at the settlement Marcus's attorney had proposed and said, without any particular drama, "This is interesting," in the tone of a doctor who's found something on a scan. "Tell me about the IP clause," she said now, over the phone. "He has contractual rights to the architectural designs created under Voss development projects during the marriage." Right. A pause. "And the designs you created before the Voss development contract? The ones you brought into the marriage?" I was quiet for a moment. "The foundation methodology," I said slowly. "Tell me about it." The foundation methodology was something I developed at 24, during my first year at the architecture firm, before I'd ever met Marcus. It was a structural approach to load distribution in commercial buildings that reduced material costs by roughly 18% without compromising integrity. I'd documented it. I'd used it. I'd applied it, without thinking too carefully about the distinction, to every Voss development project for 6 years because it was simply how I worked. Every major project in the Voss portfolio, the ones that had made the firm's reputation, the ones that had been profiled, the ones that had generated the returns Marcus was now claiming as marital assets, was built on a methodology that predated the marriage, that predated the contract. That was, Vivian said, with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had found exactly what she was looking for, mine. "He took everything," Vivian said. "He just doesn't know what everything actually includes." What followed was 6 weeks of the most focused work I had ever done. Vivian retained a forensic accountant, a precise, unhurried man named Gerald Cho, who spoke about financial structures the way surgeons speak about anatomy, with total clarity and zero sentiment. He went through 6 years of Voss development financials and found, in the careful documentation of every project, the consistent fingerprint of my methodology. Not just in the designs, in the cost structures, in the efficiency margins, in the very numbers Marcus had used to grow the portfolio to its current value. The IP Gerald calculated represented a significant portion of the portfolio's worth. Conservative estimate, substantial. Real estimate, the kind of number that changes the terms of a conversation entirely. Vivian also found the contract amendment, the one I'd signed 3 years ago, the one that had seemed to transfer IP rights, and had it examined by a specialist who identified that it had been drafted in a way that was, at minimum, ethically problematic and potentially legally insufficient. Given that I'd signed without independent counsel, Marcus's attorney received Vivian's counter-filing on the Thursday morning. I was told, secondhand, that Marcus read it twice. Jonah was in my kitchen when I got the call from Vivian confirming the settlement had been restructured. He was making dinner, something simple, pasta and good olive oil. And I sat at the kitchen island of my temporary apartment and listened to Vivian's voice with the phone pressed hard against my ear, and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time, like myself. When I hung up, Jonah looked at me from across the kitchen. "Good news," he said. "The kind that takes 6 years to arrive," I said. He nodded, went back to the pasta. Then, after a moment, "I need to tell you something." I looked at him. He turned off the burner, turned around, leaned against the counter with his arms folded in the posture of someone gathering themselves for a real conversation. My company isn't small, he said. I mean, it started small, but Reeves Construction has about 300 employees now, and we're in the middle of acquiring a regional development firm. And my father started it, and I've been running it for 8 years. And he exhaled. I've been not mentioning it because the last 3 women I dated found out what the company was worth before they found out what I liked for breakfast. I looked at him for a long moment. You like black coffee and sourdough toast, I said. No butter. Something in his face softened entirely. Yeah, he said. Exactly. The final meeting with Marcus happened in Vivian's conference room on a Tuesday in March. He walked in with his attorney and his father, Gerald Voss Sr., who had apparently decided this required family representation, and sat across from me with the expression of a man who had expected a different version of this room, a smaller one. A version where I was grateful for whatever I was given. I had my attorney. I had Gerald Cho's financial analysis. I had 24 pages of documentation establishing the provenance and value of a methodology that had been quietly powering his family's portfolio for 6 years while my name appeared on nothing, public-facing. I didn't perform anger. I didn't need to. The documents were angrier than I could ever be, and they didn't waver. Marcus looked at me across the table. Really looked the way he'd stopped doing somewhere around year 3, and said, I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. That's the whole story, Marcus. He didn't understand what I meant. That was fine. I wasn't saying it for him. The settlement was restructured. The house, which I had designed and which was built on my methodology, came back to me. A portion of the portfolio reflecting the IP contribution. A formal acknowledgement in writing of my creative contribution to the Voss development projects. Not everything. Enough. Enough was what I'd wanted. Not punishment. Not theater. Just the accurate accounting of what I had actually been worth, set against what I had been told I was worth, and the permanent, documented difference between the two. I kept the dog. Bo was asleep on his bed in the corner of my home office when I sat down at my drafting table 3 weeks after the settlement, the March light coming through the windows at the angle I designed for, and I opened a new project file. My own firm. My own name on the door. Calloway Architecture. Clean and plain and entirely mine. Jonah had offered to invest. I told him I'd think about it. Which meant yes, eventually. When it felt right. When the thing I was building was already standing on its own before I let anyone else's name be associated with it. He'd said fair enough and meant it. That was the thing about Jonah. He meant things. Outside, the city was doing what cities do, indifferent, continuous, enormous. I picked up my pencil and felt the familiar weight of it. The specific gravity of a thing I'd been doing since I was 7 years old in my mother's kitchen, drawing buildings on the backs of grocery lists. Marcus had taken everything. He'd had no idea what he was really taking. And now it was back in my hands, where it had always been, where it would stay. Not because I'd fought for it, though I had, but because some things belong to you at a level that paperwork can delay but never permanently hold. He thought he was taking my future. He didn't know he was handing me back my name.